Hey everybody, and welcome back to our Bible study in Exodus chapter 4 today. We're just getting into the story of Moses and the 10 plagues and the freedom from slavery in Egypt and all that good stuff. So if you haven't watched the previous chapters, you still have time to catch up. We're doing one chapter every day, hopefully till we finish the entire Bible. You can download the free PDF outlines on our website at tobelikechrist.com. When did the events of Exodus chapter 4 take place? Well, Moses was born around 1591 BC, and he left Egypt when he was 40 years old. According to Acts chapter 7, verse 7, Acts is in the New Testament, Moses was 80 years old when he stood before Pharaoh as God's representative. That's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. In terms of our characters, we have the Israelites, the Hebrews. They're the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are enslaved in Egypt at this point, but they have grown into a really large nation. We're going to talk about Moses. He was a Hebrew who grew up in Pharaoh's house. He had to run away from Egypt when he was 40 years old. He's now being called back to Egypt by God to be God's representative and his spokesman for God leading the Israelites out of Egyptian slavery and into freedom. We're going to talk about Aaron here for the first time. Aaron is Moses' brother. He was a Levite, and he was the son of Amram and Jochebed, just like Moses was. Where did these events take place? Well, Moses lived in Midian with his father-in-law's family because he had married Zipporah, who was Jethro's daughter. So he was living there. But Moses met Aaron at the mountain of God, or Mount Sinai, and then he was on his way, or is planning to go back to Egypt, where the Israelite people were enslaved. Now let's break the chapter down in our outline. First section, verses 1 through 9, God gives Moses powerful signs. So, recap of the last chapter. In Exodus chapter 3, God told Moses that he was going to be his man to be a representative before Pharaoh so that God could deliver the Israelites from Egyptian slavery. But Moses was pretty hesitant. He was like, I don't think that I'm actually your guy. Moses was concerned that he would go to the Israelites and he would tell them that God appeared to him, but then they wouldn't believe him. So God gave Moses a set of miraculous signs that would prove that he had actually come from God. Moses' rod, his staff, was able to transform into a snake when he threw it on the ground. His hand was diseased with leprosy when he put it into his cloak and pulled it out. But then when he put it back into his cloak and pulled it out again, his hand was whole, like it had never been diseased. And then as a final sign, God gave Moses the ability to take water from the Nile River and transform it into blood. And so with these signs, he was going to be able to show that God's power was behind him and that he was somebody who Pharaoh needed to listen to. And he was somebody that the Israelites should trust was on their side and was representing their God. So then in our next section, verses 10 through 17, Moses continues to make excuses and God gets angry. So after God's given him these miraculous signs and comforted his concern that people aren't going to believe that he actually met with God, Moses said, well, I'm still not your man because I'm not a very eloquent man. And God reassured him and said that he would be with him. He would help him with that. He said, who made man's mouth? You think I didn't know that the way that you speak? You think I picked the wrong guy? He's like, I created you. Look, I can solve that problem. But Moses still protested. He said, no, I'm not your man. And God actually became angry with Moses. But God did tell him that he would bring his brother Aaron to him. And Aaron would be his spokesman. And Moses would give him the words of the Lord, and then Aaron would speak them. And that would solve that issue. In verses 18 through 23, we have a quick section. Moses begins his journey back to Egypt. So he's been in Midian, but now he's going back to do the Lord's will and to meet with Pharaoh and to try to free the people. God reassured Moses that all of the people who had wanted to kill him for killing the Egyptian back in, chapter 2, all of those people had died, right? So Moses didn't have any reason to fear that he was going to be in legal trouble when he got back to Egypt. So Moses took his wife and his sons, and he began the trip. And that leads us into another really interesting story, verses 24 through 26. Moses' son is circumcised. This is a story that has made a lot of people scratch their head over the years. There's not a lot of details given to us, but the text tells us that God met Moses on the way to Egypt, and he wanted to kill him. And evidently, he was angry with Moses for not circumcising his son, which God had commanded all of the Hebrew people to do to their children, their male children, on the 8th day after their birth. That was a sign of God's covenant with his people. Evidently, Moses hadn't done it, maybe because he was over in Midian. We don't know exactly. But God was angry at him for this. And so Zipporah, Moses' wife, she circumcised their boy, and this apparently appeased the anger of God. And then finally, in verses 27 through 31, Moses and Aaron meet with the elders of Israel. So God spoke to Aaron while he was in Egypt, and he told him to meet Moses in the wilderness. I always wonder how he got out of Egypt. Like, did he have to sneak out, or did he just walk out in the desert and nobody cared? I don't know. Maybe they didn't think anyone wanted to escape into the desert, so they were just it was easy to get out. But anyway, somehow Aaron gets out of Egypt, and he meets Moses at the mountain of God. And Moses recounts all the things that God has said to him and all the things that God wants him and Aaron to go do in Egypt. So Moses and Aaron go back to Egypt, and they gather all of the elders of the Israelites together, and Moses showed them the miraculous signs that God had given to him, and the people believed, and they worshiped God for sending them their deliverance. And so that is Exodus chapter 4. Whoa, we're not there yet. I will give you a little hint, though. Speaking of chapter 24, I actually just finished the outline for that one yesterday, and if you want to work ahead, the videos are going to be released on time, one a day, but I'm actually already over halfway through the book of Exodus, and you can find the outlines on the website if there's a cheat code for you if you want to work ahead. So let's talk about an application now from Exodus 4. What excuses are you making to avoid doing the work of God that scares you? We know from Acts chapter 7 that Moses wanted his people delivered from Egyptian slavery, and he even suspected that it was him that God was going to use to free the Egyptians. He expected that back when he lived in Egypt, when he killed the Egyptian, according to Acts 7 verse 25. But when God gave him the opportunity to finally do it, he resisted and he made excuses. You're always going to be able to think up excuses and reasons why you shouldn't do something, potential what-if scenarios that could happen, if you try to do the work that needs to be done. And you can excuse yourself with that fear. The question is whether or not we're going to live in that fear and do nothing to resolve the problems or take care of the needs that we see need to be done, or take on the challenge of God's work with trust that He's going to bless our circumstances and work through our weaknesses.